Hello, my lovely friends. It's Margaret, and I am here to nerd out about books. So we're going to try and talk a little bit more quietly than normal. We are having some microphone issues, so I apologize if the audio ends up being a little weird. I am just going to have to struggle through them right now. I am working on getting a lavalier mic so that I will be able to provide better quality audio for you guys later. But for now, I'm just going to have to work with this and hope that it is enough and that I can, mitigate some of the issues. Until I get a better microphone system, please just bear with me. I'm annoyed with it too. I am going to be doing my June wrap-up today. I have decided to start doing video wrap-ups as well as doing the review wrap-up that I do on my blog. Speaking of which, there is a link for that down in the description box if you want to check that out. I would love to see you on there as well as on here. But let's get into my June wrap-up because nobody wants to be here forever. June was a really good reading month for me, honestly, because I read 9 books total in June. 3 of those were audiobooks. 1 of those was half audiobook, half hard copy book, and the remaining 5 were all hard copy books. Of the 9 books I read, 4 were 5-star books and 4 were 4-star books, so that was really good. I only had 1 2-star read, so I'm very impressed with all the books that I read this month, pretty much. I'm so happy with them. I can't wait to gush about them and tell you about them, and several of them are going to be getting full-scale reviews. The first book that I read was Beasts Made of Night by Tochi Onyebuchi. This takes place in the city of Tos. It is a fictional city based in Africa in a world where mages can take the sins from your body and turn them into corporeal creatures that they then hire sin eaters to eat. Now, these sin eaters take on the person's sin, have to process them, and they can only do that for so long. In this book, our main character is Taj. He is one of the best sin eaters in the city of Tos. His skin is so covered with tattoos from the sins he's eaten that he is running out of space, which means he is running out of time. However, in the city of Tos, there is it's very stratified wealth-wise, and so his family comes from kind of the bottom of the pile, and so every sin he eats means money going back to his family. Unfortunately for Taj, he ends up eating the sin of a pretty high-up member of the royal family in Tos, and that puts him in the sights of the head mage, who has some shady plans, and Taj just so happens to fit into those plans. I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. I'll link up top to the reading vlog where I was reading this, so you can see if you want to see my reactions as they're coming. The one thing that I think detracted from it, and I think it could have been a 5-star read from me if I had not listened to the audiobook, there was just so much going on, and the storytelling style was such that I just kept getting lost. But I loved the world building. He had such an intricate magic system. He had such a real feeling, city, this is basically a freaking castle. It felt like Minas Tirith, only it was hot and people didn't have to wear as many clothes. It gave you several different characters. It gave you a really good political intrigue, which I enjoy. I like things that I have to start figuring out, okay, what is this person doing? What is this person doing? So, all in all, would recommend. I cannot wait for the next book to come out. I will probably, again, reread the first book just because I want to kind of figure out what it was I missed. The second book that I read in June is one of my favorite books from the month, and that is Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. Dread Nation takes place in a post-Civil War world. We're talking 10, 15 years after the Civil War, but the thing is, the Civil War got called off at Gettysburg, because at Gettysburg, the dead started rising and eating both friend and foe. Dread Nation follows our protagonist, Jane McKean. She is a young woman going to Miss Preston's School of Combat. All of those people who are sitting cushy on their plantations and happy with, making their slaves second-class citizens, if not worse, decided that the best way to deal with the zombie plague was to free all the slaves and then make them fight the zombies. We are living in a world where the Negro and Native American Education Act is in place, and so basically if you are not white, you have to go to a combat school and learn how to fight so that you can go and protect your country from the zombies. Let's be real, we know who they were really protecting. This is not just my favorite book of the month, but it is one of my favorite books of the year. I loved getting to know Jane. I loved how plucky she was and how she didn't just sit back and do what she was told. She was here's an issue, I'm going to go take care of it. I'm not gonna let nobody tell me what to do because I know how to fight these zombies best. And she really does know how to fight the zombies. I will have a full review of this if you want to check it out. I'm not sure when it's posting, but it will be up. So you should subscribe so that you can see it. I loved her. I love, like, we got so many different complex characters. I love the parallels that Justina Ireland makes between what's going on here and what we can see in the racial tensions that you have in the United States today. I really liked the fact that, like, I don't know, I'm sure there are other zombie books that have similar zombie setups, but I felt like this was a very, like, she just set this zombie plague up in such a realistic way. The next book that I finished was my next audiobook. This is a poetry collection, and I have been trying to get more into reading poetry. I thought this sounded like a very interesting book for me to read. I've heard people say a lot of really great things about it. Unfortunately, I don't think it was for me. I think part of that is because I listened to it. So I do plan on rereading it so that I can see maybe some of the structure and kind of get a better idea. But the main thing was that it just was a lot more sexually graphic than I personally like. She was writing about stuff, and that is very important to write about. She talks about sexual assault. She talks about coming into your sexuality and becoming comfortable with yourself as a woman. And those are all very important topics. I just wish I would have appreciated it more if it hadn't quite been so graphic. That said, she had some gorgeous turns of phrase. Like, there were just lines I was like, oh, I want to highlight that. I want to put that on my wall. I did end up giving it 2 out of 5 stars just because I was underwhelmed and a little bit uncomfortable with the book. But it was still, like, she did still have some beautiful poems. So if you're into poetry and that stuff doesn't make you uncomfortable, I would suggest checking it out. My next book of June was a reread, and that was Howls Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Now, this I reread because I am doing my Read the Book series, and this was the first book I was tackling. I will link to that up top if you would like to check it out. Howls Moving Castle follows Sophie Hatter. She is one of 3 sisters, and one day, while she is working in her family hat shop, she gets a visit from the Witch of the Waste. The Witch of the Waste is a big bad witch who lives around in the Waste outside of Sophie's town of Market Chipping. Now, apparently, Sophie has some magic of her own, and she has been creating magical hats, which offends this witch. And so the Witch of the Waste curses Sophie to be a 90-year-old woman. And Sophie's automatic reaction was, I need to leave everything I've known and go wandering in the waste, where she runs into Howl's castle. Now, the wizard Howl is another very, like, almost mythic creature that is in the countryside in Ingery outside of Market Chipping. He has also been a threat in the countryside. The people of Market Chipping are very worried by this castle that belches black smoke and blue fire. And then Sophie runs into it and decides, I don't have anything better to do. I'm going to be Howl's cleaning lady and try and figure out the mystery behind Wizard Howl. This is one of my favorite books of all time. Like, you can see how often I have read it. It's got stains. It has got food on the inside. I love this book. I've reread it more times than I can count. I just love Sophie and Howl and their dynamic and, like, the push and pull between them and how they're always, like, arguing with each other, but they still get along with each other. She has such just, like, beautiful prose. It's very simple. It's not fancy, it's not flashy, but it's still very evocative. It's witty, it's clever, it's fantastical, it's whimsical. You need to read it. The next book I read in June was From Twinkle with Love by Sandhya Menon. This is the sequel to When Dimple Met Rishi, so I really was looking forward to it. I loved When Dimple Met Rishi, like, automatic connection, automatically into the story. It was great. This is about Twinkle Mehra. She is a junior in high school. She's a little bit of a wallflower. She considers herself what you would say, what she calls a groundling. Her best friend has become one of the silk feathered hats, which means the higher echelons of her high school. And she's trying to figure out a way to get her back and rekindle that friendship. As she's trying to figure this out, her classmate Sahil Roy approaches her about making a film for the Midsummer Night Festival at her school. Twinkle is an aspiring filmmaker, if you couldn't tell from the camera, and she has been making videos on YouTube and stuff, and this seems like a really good chance for her to not only, like, tell a story and show people what she can do, but also to maybe get her best friend back. It also doesn't hurt that Sahil's twin brother Neil happens to be a longtime crush of Twinkle's. And she thinks that if she can get Neil to notice her and like her, he might be able to help her bump up in social level. Alright, so I had some issues with this book, and I'm going to go over those first. It is told in letters to her favorite director. I was not a big fan of that. However, on the other hand, I was a big fan of the fact that like Sahil's side of the story is told through blog posts on his blog and like texts between him and his friends. I found that very intriguing and interesting. But I did feel like the whole diary entry kind of style was a little gimmicky and I could have done without it. And I do think that, I don't know, I did not connect right away with these two characters. Not the way I did with when Dimple met Rishi. However, there's like a plot twist, sort of. There's a character arc twist about halfway through the book that automatically I was like, oh yes, I must have more. And so once that hit, I couldn't put it down and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Twinkle is a very interesting and complex character. Probably one of the most teenage characters I've ever read, because she just is believable as a teenager. She has so much stuff that is a mess, and in such a messy teenage way. It's not a mess like I'm a mess now as an adult. It's like a mess as if I would have been a mess at like 16. I highly recommend it. I think everyone, if you liked When Dimple Met Rishi, I think you will like this book. I do, if you feel that it's a little bit slow or you're not connecting at the beginning, just kind of, I would say, stick it out. Try and get further into it, because I did really enjoy it, and there was a good payoff at the end, okay guys? The payoff for the book was fantastic. I end up giving this 4 out of 5 stars, and I really think you should read it. I also gave Howls Moving Castle 5 out of 5 stars, and it has always been 5 out of 5 stars. I'm just gonna say, because I love it that much. The next book is my biggest surprise of the month. I was not expecting to love this book as much as I did, but oh my gosh, this freaking book. And that is Black Rabbit Hall by Ava Chase. This follows 2 different storylines. One is Amber and one is Lorna. Amber is a teenage girl who lives in the Cornish countryside at Black Rabbit Hall. She and her family are working through a tragedy, having to deal with that and the repercussions of that. It's kind of caused some cracks in her family. And then Lorna is a young woman looking for a place to get married. She is in love with the Cornish countryside. She has great memories from when she was a kid, visiting it with her mom. And so she really wants to get married in one of the old Cornish houses, and Black Rabbit Hall comes up as one of the possibilities for her. The woman who owns the house actually ends up inviting her to stay the weekend so she can get a better idea of the house and see if it's the proper place for her to get married. And as she spends that weekend there, she starts to learn things about the family and what happened. And so she's drawn into this mystery of this tragedy that happened one summer at Black Rabbit Hall. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I was not expecting this to be a 5-star book. I thought maybe 3 stars, at most 4 stars. But like, just this book, oh my gosh, I was dancing at the end. I was so, like, it just had such a great payoff for you as the reader. It will, like, trample your feelings. It will destroy you, but you will be just, like, the ending is so good and makes it all worth it. I was so happy with it. I will say I did figure out the twist. When I read any book, I'm basically like trying to find all the little clues the author has left, all of the foreshadowing, and trying to figure things out ahead of the characters. That's the way I work. So when I figure out the twist, I'm very happy with it. I know some people don't feel like that, and I don't know how obvious the twist would have been to someone who wasn't me and who wasn't trying to figure it out. But I've been trying to get more into thrillers and suspense novels, and this was so good. She built the tension so well. She kept you on the edge of your seat, always wondering. I mean, guys, listen, I got A Darker Shade of Magic on my overdrive about halfway through this, and I didn't even pick it up. In a few minutes, you're going to think that sounds crazy. 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely recommend. Definitely will be doing a full spoiler-free review on this one. The next book that I read in the month of June was Children of Blood and Bone by Tommy Adeyemi. I know, finally. I finally read it. This follows Zaylee, Amari, and Inan. They live in the land of Orisha, and when Zaylee was a child, there was magic. However, magic disappeared one day, just in time for the king to raid the countryside and kill all of the practicing magi. So basically any magi over 13 years old who had come into their power. We find Zaylee, who is suddenly in the position to bring magic back and turn her people back into magi and give them power again to fight back against the oppressive regime of this king. This opportunity comes to her through one of the most unexpected sources that you could think of, and that is the king's daughter. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I read the first half as an audiobook, and then like had the hardest time finding another audiobook to listen to. It wasn't a pressing need because I owned the book, and so like finishing it wasn't a big deal, and I got caught up on book 2. Like, it took me so long to get through it that I had to go back and like I wanted to know what happened next, but so I picked it up and I continued reading in hardcover form. The world is based on West African mythology, which I don't know a ton about, but I would love to know more about. If you have any recommendations to drop in my comments, do so please. She did such a good job of creating this world and this magic system that were believable and were rich. I loved her writing style because I found this very easy to get through without sacrificing like the craft. Like, it was a very easy read, but it wasn't one of those reads that it was easy because it was just like juvenile. It was easy because her writing style is just so like natural to read, at least for me. I love the character dynamics and the play between the characters. We have 2 sets of siblings and 2 romances going on, which makes Margaret happy. But we have 2 sets of siblings, so we get to see the interplay between those siblings throughout this whole book. Definitely recommend it. It is definitely worth the hype. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a review on this one just because I know so many people have reviewed it, but if you would like to hear more in depth on my thoughts, I would suggest dropping down in my comments and letting me know. The next book I read in June was my second reread of the month, and that was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. It's Jesse the Reader's fault. If any of you follow him on Twitter, he was tweeting about the fact that he was rereading it. And so I was like, I'm going to see if my library has the audiobook. And they had the audiobook, and it came in this month. And so I listened to it, but I regret nothing. Absolutely nothing. The first time I read this, it was a 4-star read. This time it was a 5-star read because I knew so much more. I was so much more attached to the characters. And I was able to see so much more of like the foreshadowing that she had put in this. I just was able to appreciate so much more this time. A Darker Shade of Magic follows Kel. He is one of 2 Antari, and they are the last people able to travel between the Londons. Now, we have a world where there are 3 parallel Londons: Kel's London, which is Red London, our London, which is Grey London, and White London. There used to be a 4th London, Black London, but unfortunately for the people of Black London, magic basically became a disease and took that world over, and so Black London was sealed off, and the doors were closed between the Londons to keep things from happening. And the only people who can travel between the Londons are Kel and Holland. Because he is the only person that can, one of the only people in his world that can travel between the Londons, Kel actually ends up turning into a little bit of a smuggler. Now, they are not supposed to take things between the worlds, but Kel is a rebel like that. He accidentally ends up smuggling an artifact, a remnant from Black London, into his London and then into Grey London. Realizing his mistake, he automatically is like, oh, I need to take this back and take it to Black London. But before he can do that, the artifact gets stolen by a young woman named Lila Bard. And so Kel has to figure out how to get the artifact back and convince this young woman to help him get it back where it belongs so that he can stop the apocalypse from happening. Victoria Schwab is one of my favorite fantasy authors. Like, I'm reading this Savage Song right now, and it is just as good as this was. Again, a wonderful, rich world with a system of magic that's just really compelling and interesting, and not one that I have seen before. I mean, there's parts of it that are, but like what Kel can do is not anything that I have seen before. I love the idea of traveling between dimensions and it being magical versus a science thing. And if you like magic systems, if you are a fan of like Lord of the Rings, if you are a fan of Harry Potter, if you are a fan of like, if you are a fan of anything that has to do with magic, I would recommend this. So apparently this was the month of fantasy because my last book is also a fantasy book. The final book I read in June was Onyx and Ivory by Mindy Arnett. Kate used to live in Norgard as part of the king's court. However, her father tried to assassinate the king, so that kind of got her kicked out of the nobility, and she has been living in Farhold as a royal courier. Now, couriers have a very dangerous job because in the land of Rhyme, there are these creatures called night drakes, and night drakes come out, as their name would suggest, at night, and basically will eat anything human or any animals that have been near humans. Couriers have to make their trips only during the day. So they have to be fast, they have to be skilled. Kate has a forbidden magic that allows her to communicate with horses. Now, because of this magic, she can't tell anyone that she has this magic, but it does make her very good at her job. Because people are afraid of what the Wilders can do, they're basically outlawed and they're hunted down. As Kate is on the way home from one of her runs, she comes across a caravan that is under attack from the Drakes. But the funny thing about this attack is they're attacking during the day. And as far as Kate knows, daylight is fatal to night drakes. Kate stops to help, but there is only one survivor, a young man named Corwin. And as it just so happens, Corwin is not only her ex-boyfriend, but he is also the youngest son of the king that her father tried to kill. Unfortunately, Kate might have a solution to their day drake problem, and so she and Corwin end up teaming up and trying to tackle this problem of the day drakes. And I think you know where it goes from there, guys. Doesn't it sound like something Margaret would like? Again, this was a really interesting world that she built. I was invested in this thing. Though it did take me the first, I think maybe I would say 70 pages to get into this story, but once I got into this story, I mean, I was less than a quarter of the way through, but once I got into this story, I was here for it. Now, there was some issues. I had issues with her writing style at times. There were just a whole bunch. I remember there were a whole bunch of places where I stopped and said, I would have written that differently. Other than that, it was a solid story. Besides the two separate types of magic, there are also different levels to the magic system. And then we've got some political intrigue going on in here with the mages and some there's a lot of who is actually on Kate's side. You also have Kate trying to solve the mystery of why her father tried to assassinate the king who happened to be his friend. So you have all of these elements that were just beautifully woven together into one single cohesive story. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, again, only because I had the issues with the writing at times, but they were very minor issues and only a few times, and then I think I completely stopped paying attention because I stayed up so late trying to finish this book. So many nights. I don't know why, because some of them I was like, oh, I'm halfway through. There's no way I can get through it. Mom will try. That is everything that I read in June. You know the drill. If you like this or you found it helpful at all, please give it a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to hit that red button down there that says subscribe. I would love to see your lovely face here on a regular basis. If you want more of my bookish musings, you can find me on Instagram or Twitter. On both of those, I am at the word nerd. Don't forget, in nerd, that is a 3 instead of the E. I also have a blog where I talk about my own personal writing projects, which I am about to dive right back into and finish. I'm gonna be done this darn book at some point in my life. And if you would like any updates on that or any more of my bookish musings, you can find me at my blog, which is down in the description box. That is it for now, my friends. I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!